surviving the impossible. Can you believe that tens of thousands of years ago, long before hospitals, antibiotics, or even a clean bandage existed, our ancestors could survive devastating injuries? Many people imagine that ancient humans were simply doomed the moment they broke a bone or became seriously ill. But archaeologists have discovered numerous skeletons bearing evidence of severe injuries that later healed. Those bones tell us something remarkable. The injured survived long enough for their bodies to recover. What carried them across the fragile line between life and death was not physical strength alone. They had something even more powerful: empathy and collective intelligence. A badly injured person could not hunt, gather food, or escape predators alone. Their survival depended on the entire group. Others had to share food, provide protection, help them move, and care for them day after day. In that sense, healed ancient bones are also evidence that practical medical knowledge and human compassion appeared very early in our evolutionary history. Today, researchers use a specialized field known as the archaeology of care to uncover these stories from ancient human remains. They examine signs of disease, healed fractures, deformities, and injuries that individuals survived with for years. From those clues, scientists can reconstruct patterns of prehistoric healthcare and estimate how much time, energy, and food a community may have devoted to members who could no longer fully care for themselves. The first ancient surgery. One astonishing discovery takes us back roughly 31,000 years to a remote cave in Borneo. There, scientists uncovered the skeleton of a young person who was missing the lower third of the left leg. The cut through the bone was sharp and clean, unlike the irregular damage expected from an accident or an animal attack. The evidence indicates that the limb was deliberately removed, making this one of the most remarkable examples of sophisticated amputation known from prehistory. Performing such an operation in a tropical rainforest would have required extraordinary practical knowledge of the human body. The people carrying it out needed some understanding of where major blood vessels, muscles, and skin tissues were located so they could limit dangerous bleeding. Infection posed another enormous threat. In a hot, humid environment, an open wound could quickly become deadly, so they likely relied on natural methods developed through observation and experience to keep wounds clean. They did not know that bacteria existed, but generations of trial and error could still teach them what worked. What happened next is even more remarkable. The young person survived the operation and lived for another 6 to 9 years. The remaining leg bone healed completely and later became smaller from years of reduced weight bearing. That means this individual lived with the disability for a long time. In Borneo's difficult mountainous terrain, moving alone would have been extremely challenging, so other members of the group must have regularly helped carry, guide, or support them. The surgery itself was only part of the story. Long-term care from the community was just as important, and Borneo was not the only case. Around 7,000 years ago in what is now France, an older man had his left arm amputated and survived. The cut was remarkably precise, likely made with a flint tool, and the remaining bone showed substantial healing and new growth. He went on living for years afterward. In an early farming community, that kind of survival strongly suggests prolonged care from the people around him. Holes in the skull. Yet amputation was not the most startling procedure our ancestors attempted. Ancient people also performed an operation that sounds almost unimaginable: opening a hole in the skull while the patient was still alive. The procedure, known as trepanation, appeared more than 10,000 years ago and was practiced in many parts of the world. Practitioners cut, scraped, or drilled away part of the skull until they reached the protective membrane surrounding the brain. The idea of doing this thousands of years before modern operating rooms existed is difficult to comprehend. Stone Age practitioners therefore needed tools capable of remarkably precise cutting. They used flint, extremely sharp volcanic glass, and even sharpened shells to work on the skull. In some later ancient cultures, specially made metal ritual blades were also used. These tools may look primitive to us, but their materials were chosen carefully. Ancient people understood which substances were sharp enough, hard enough, and controllable enough for delicate procedures. So why would anyone perform something that, from a modern perspective, might look like torture? In some cases, trepanation may have been a practical response to serious head injuries caused by hunting accidents or violence. Opening the skull could help remove damaged bone fragments or relieve problems associated with bleeding inside the head. But in certain cultures, seizures and severe headaches were also believed to be caused by harmful spirits. Trepanation could therefore serve two purposes at once: treating a physical injury and performing a ritual intended to release whatever people believed was tormenting the patient. You might assume that prehistoric trepanation must have had an enormous death rate. Surprisingly, estimates suggest that anywhere from 50% to 90% of patients may have survived. Many ancient skulls show rounded edges around the opening and clear signs of new bone growth, proving that the patient lived long enough for the wound to heal, and, in some cases, survived for years afterward. Remarkably, these survival rates could even exceed those seen in some Western hospitals during the 19th century, when postoperative infections and cross-contamination killed large numbers of patients. Nature's secret medicine. That raises an even more puzzling question. How did ancient humans fight infection when they did not know bacteria existed and had nothing resembling modern antibiotics? Part of the answer may lie in thousands of years of careful observation. People experimented with leaves, bark, herbs, and fungi, gradually learning which natural materials could ease pain or help wounds heal. Today, fossilized dental plaque acts like a remarkable biological archive, preserving DNA and other traces that allow scientists to identify some of the things our ancestors once chewed and consumed. In a cave in Spain, scientists discovered the remains of a Neanderthal who had suffered from an extremely painful dental abscess and showed signs of an intestinal infection. DNA preserved in the individual's dental plaque revealed that they had consumed a considerable amount of poplar bark. Poplar bark is not an ordinary food source. Its presence suggests that this Neanderthal may have deliberately sought it out as a form of self-medication. The reason becomes clearer when we look at what poplar bark contains. It naturally carries salicin, a chemical compound that can be converted inside the body into salicylic acid, a substance closely related to modern aspirin. In other words, a Neanderthal suffering from severe tooth pain may have discovered that a particular tree could help ease the suffering tens of thousands of years before modern painkillers existed. That knowledge would not have come from laboratories. It would have grown from observation, experimentation, and experience passed from one generation to the next. But the same Neanderthal's dental plaque contained an even more intriguing clue: DNA from penicillium, a type of mold associated with naturally occurring antimicrobial compounds. This raises the possibility that ancient humans sometimes deliberately consumed mold-covered plants in an attempt to fight infection. We cannot know how much they understood about what was happening inside the body, but the evidence comes from tens of thousands of years before penicillin became one of the great breakthroughs of modern medicine. Bark and mold were not the only things in nature's medicine cabinet. Our ancestors also chewed intensely bitter herbs such as yarrow and chamomile. These plants offer little nutritional value, yet they contain compounds and essential oils with anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial properties. Chewing them may have helped clean the mouth, reduce discomfort, and possibly protect damaged tissue from infection. Their bitterness may have made them poor food, but that did not mean they were useless. Another clue comes from ancient wetlands in Florida. Inside the digestive systems of people who died around 7,000 years ago, archaeologists found elderberry seeds, wild grapes, and other plants known to contain anti-inflammatory compounds. These foods may have been gathered specifically for people who were sick or recovering from injury in order to ease their discomfort. If so, prehistoric care involved more than simply treating a wound. It also meant choosing particular foods and medicinal plants for someone who was suffering. No one left behind. Yet perhaps the most remarkable part of ancient medicine had nothing to do with stone blades, medicinal plants, or surgical skill. It was the way humans treated those who could no longer protect or provide for themselves. In a world where every meal required the energy of hunting, gathering, or carrying food across difficult landscapes, supporting someone who could not work represented a serious cost to the entire group. And still, archaeological evidence shows that vulnerable individuals were sometimes cared for over many years. One extraordinary example comes from a 15-year-old boy who lived in Florida more than 7,000 years ago. He was born with a severe form of spina bifida that left his lower body paralyzed and likely caused long-term pain. At some point, He also lost a foot through injury, yet the damaged area healed. Simply surviving into adolescence with such serious disabilities would have been almost impossible on his own. Someone had to feed him, protect him, and care for him day after day. The boy could not hunt or gather food for himself, yet he survived because his community supported him. People shared their food, collected berries that may have helped relieve pain, and likely carried or assisted him whenever the group moved. When he eventually died, he was wrapped in finely made woven material and buried with considerable care. His grave is more than evidence of prehistoric medicine. It is an early trace of something deeply human: compassion, respect, and a sense of responsibility for those who depended on others. Let us travel even farther back in time to roughly 500,000 years ago and meet Benjamina, a young Homo heidelbergensis girl. Benjamina was born with a congenital condition that caused parts of her skull to fuse too early, severely deforming the shape of her head and affecting her development. Her face became asymmetrical, and she likely faced serious difficulties with movement and cognitive development. In a world filled with predators, food shortages, and no medical system of any kind, a child in her condition would have had almost no chance of surviving alone. Yet what happened to Benjamina challenges the old idea that prehistoric life was ruled only by survival of the strongest. She was not abandoned. The people around her appear to have shared the responsibility of protecting her, feeding her, and helping her through everyday life. With that support, she survived for roughly a decade, something that would have been extremely difficult without constant care. For this reason, Benjamina is often seen as one of the earliest pieces of evidence that compassion and empathy reached deep into the evolutionary history of humanity. If Benjamina shows us how an ancient community could care for a vulnerable child, Shanidar 1 reveals how long they might support a severely injured adult. This famous Neanderthal skeleton was discovered in Iraq. The man had suffered a powerful injury to the head that badly damaged his left eye and affected the right side of his body. His right arm was also severely injured and had become greatly reduced in size, or may possibly have been deliberately amputated. With one eye largely unusable, one arm severely impaired, and legs that made walking difficult, Shanidar 1 clearly could not hunt or defend himself like a healthy member of the group. And yet he survived into his 40s, or perhaps even his 50s, a significant age in the harsh conditions of the Ice Age. His survival strongly suggests that others protected and supported him for many years. Perhaps his value to the group no longer came from physical strength, but from experience, memory, and knowledge that could be passed on to younger generations. Another discovery from a cave in Italy shows that this kind of social bond was not limited to people who had suffered injuries. Archaeologists uncovered the grave of a mother and daughter who lived around 12,000 years ago and were buried closely together. The daughter had a severe form of congenital dwarfism that altered her body, stiffened her elbow joints, and limited her ability to move. Her mother had a similar condition, though in a milder form. Despite their physical challenges, both women lived within the protection of their community and were ultimately buried with care and respect. Compassion, however, was not the only thing that helped ancient people survive serious injuries. They also developed practical skills for treating broken bones. Through observation, they could have learned that a fracture would not heal properly if the injured limb kept moving. So they needed to bring the broken ends closer to their natural position and keep the area still. Wooden splints, secured with vines or other woven materials, may have been used to stabilize an arm or leg while the body repaired itself. Evidence for this appears in Neanderthal remains from Croatia dating back roughly 130,000 years. Some collarbones and forearm bones had once been badly fractured, yet later healed in relatively good alignment. Broken bones do not automatically return to the correct position when the fractured ends are badly displaced, so this pattern suggests that Neanderthals may have known how to stabilize injured limbs. Without such care, a bone could heal at the wrong angle and permanently reduce the function of the arm. These remains suggest that their medical care was far more sophisticated than simple instinct. Even tooth pain, which may sound minor compared with a broken limb, could become extremely dangerous, and ancient humans appear to have tried to treat it as well. They may have removed damaged teeth or worked directly on injured areas using simple tools. In Siberia, researchers identified a Neanderthal molar with a deep cavity that appeared to have been manipulated and cleaned with a pointed object. Removing damaged material could have reduced pressure, cleared the affected area, and possibly helped limit the spread of infection into the jawbone. When all of this evidence is brought together, the image of our ancestors begins to change completely. They were not simply brutal, selfish people driven by instinct who abandoned anyone too weak to keep up. They observed the human body, made tools, searched for medicinal plants, stabilized broken bones, and cared for sick or injured people over long periods of time. More importantly, they built communities in which the life of a vulnerable individual could still be considered worth protecting. And perhaps that is the most important lesson of all. Empathy, compassion, and the desire to save another human life were not inventions of hospitals or modern civilization. These qualities existed long before writing, cities, or science. Sharing food, carrying an injured companion, caring for a disabled child, or keeping a broken limb still while it healed may all have helped humanity survive some of the harshest periods in our history. We are here today not only because our ancestors were strong enough to survive, but because they learned not to leave one another behind.